I needed new fencing for around the Ferris wheel that I'm going to repaint. So I made a jig, and I'm going to show you how I make these fences. This is what the fence is going to look like when it's finished, and it's going to get painted, and then I'll be able to put it on the layout. The model that I used, the original, was one that I picked up at a train show one time. I picked up a little pack of these, and these are actually made out of a lead-based material. And rather than buy a whole bunch of them, I thought, you know what, I can make my own. So I used this one as my pattern. And like I said, what I did first was I made one out of wire, and then I made a jig using the wood, this wood, and these nails. And these are actually nails that I cut off. So it's a bending jig for my brass rod that I'm going to use. And I use K&S number 162, which is a 1/16 inch brass rod. And that's what the whole thing is made out of. And we're going to get to it, and I'll show you how I do it. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my soldering iron on, and I use a Weller little station, and I got it up a little bit higher than I normally do for my electronics soldering, because this is brass rod, so it's going to take a little bit more heat. So what I do is I put my brass rod in to my first part of my jig. Now my line that I drew for my ground is actually right here. So I want one of the legs of the fence a little bit longer, so that when I'm done with these, I can just drill a 1/16 inch hole and drop them down into that hole. So one of the legs, I don't want to do two of them, because then I got to make sure that I got two holes in the layout that are exactly right. So one hole is plenty. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to bend it around here. And then bend it around this one. Take it out, make sure it's nice and straight. And then I'm going to just take my little flush cut nippers, and I'm going to cut it off. But when I cut it off, I'm going to cut it off right at that, what I call my ground line, which is right here. Okay, now that just gives me the top part of the fence without the rungs in it. So I've made a couple of them here. All right. Now what I'm going to do is, after I get a bunch of these made, I actually had to make around 24 of them. I'm going to drop that back into my jig again. Now I'm going to do a lot of soldering here with a lot of soldering flux. So I'm going to use my fume extractor. I'm hoping it doesn't make too much noise, but what that does is it sucks all the solder fumes up through a filter, and I use that a lot especially when I'm going to do a lot of soldering. So what I'm going to do first is cut my bottom rung, lay it up against that side using my nippers again. I'm going to cut it. Now I'm going to take a file and file that little sharp edge off. Make sure it's going to fit. Okay, now once I got it fit so it fits in there, turn my extractor on. Grab my solder, put a little bit of solder flux, I use no corrode flux, onto my solder, heat up my brass rod, and I got my first piece in. Okay, now I'm going to take my brass rod again, and I have my lines across across this piece of wood. They're probably hard for you to see, but they're right across here. So I can just lay my brass rod along that line, measure, file up little sharp edge, and there's my first one. Now I'm going to make I made a whole bunch of those, so I'm going to need like 24 of these to go around my Ferris wheel. So I'm going to get working on these, and I'll get these done, and then I'll show you what comes next. Alright, so I made 24 of these little fence pieces, and after I got done with them, I actually took them and washed them really good. I used a brass wire brush and actually some lava soap and scrubbed the heck out of this thing. Made sure they were good and dry, took a filed off any of the rough edges of the solder that I made, and then I actually washed them in acetone. That took off any of the soap scum. I took off any extra dirt that was laying around on the wire, because I don't need all that for when I'm going to paint them. Alright, so then what I did was I stopped at, I'm not sure where these came from. These are either from Joann Fabrics or AC Moore or maybe Michael's. These little round things are actually little beads. And what I had to do is I had to drill it had a hole in the bottom of the bead, but the hole wasn't quite the right size. So I drilled each one of these out to a 1/16 of an inch. Now that's going to be my base or my fake base. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide one of those on this end, and I'm going to put one on the other end. Now the one on the short end goes right down to, so that the wire itself goes right down to the base. Just like that. Alright? Now, I drilled a 1/16 inch hole with my piece of wood here, laid a piece of wax paper down so my glue doesn't make my everything stick, and I'm going to drop that down in to that hole. Now I'm going to push that little base down until it reaches the piece of wood. Now I'm going to basically have a level piece of a fence with two little bases on it. I'm going to take my super glue, which I probably really wouldn't need, but I'm going to use it anyway. Drop a little super glue on. And I'm going to do the same thing to another one. Drop a little glue on. Okay, now I'm going to do this for all 24 of these. Then we're going to get to painting them. So I'll get them done. I'm going to I'll have to prime them. I'll use an automotive metal paint primer first, and then I'm going to hand paint. I'll spray paint them white, and then I'm going to paint a red bar and a blue bar. So I got red and white and blue fencing.